Right. Yeah. Thanks, Christy, for the introduction there. Yeah. As she mentioned, I'm Robert Held with Verve Industrial. John Livingston had been scheduled to present the session, but unfortunately he's taken ill, so he asked me to step in his stead. Just a tiny bit about my background. I actually VP of 3 different departments we have here at Verve: our customer success, our sales engineering, as well as a managed services group that we have here. My background has been primarily security. I spent about 10 years at Tripwire Software, started their energy practice there, wrote one of their products that they use for actually NERC CIP compliance. And then I spent but the last 5 years before Verve over at ServiceNow in their security and risk practice. So not only working on their vulnerability management products, but also on their GRC, their governance, risk, and compliance products that they had over there. And it was time for me to get back in the ICS space. So I made my way back over this way. So what I wanted to talk about today really is not so much Verve as a product, but really about our strategy around how we assess environments, how we handle vulnerabilities, and kind of the background around how Verve got put together, right? So we're actually a 30-year-old control systems engineering company. We started building control systems for customers, a lot of different types of systems, different vendors, and about 15 years into that journey, we had some customers come to us and say, we have these new requirements, we've got some regulatory things that we have to comply with, and some security challenges. You guys helped us, build this system. Can you help us protect it? And that's really where we launched what we call the Verve Security Center. And that was about 15 years ago. We started really building a product around, how can we monitor things in these environments? How can we, accomplish these tasks that our customers need done in those environments, whether it's, vulnerabilities, logging, asset discovery, all these things, and how can we do it in a very OT friendly manner, right? We're we could certainly address a lot of things on the IT side of the house. That's really not our focus. We're built from the ground up as an OT product by OT engineers. So we understand what to do in those environments, what not to do in those environments, to really provide a safe experience for how can I get a lot done in these environments without causing disruption. So again, I'm not going to focus a whole lot on the platform today. It's more going to be about strategy and process and how we accomplish some of these things. So as we go through here, where I wanted to start really was to talk about some of the cyber risks in OT. Now, certainly there's probably a lot of practitioners on the call here. You probably have a good understanding of a lot of these, but I really just wanted to set the stage for why Verve does things the way we do, why we take the strategies that we do to address not only vulnerabilities in your environment, but some of the other challenges you have around regulatory pressures and configuration items and really risk in the environment, right? The only reason we do vulnerabilities is to address risk, but there's a lot of other things in the environment that cause that risk that we want to help address as well. And then we'll talk a bit about what we call a tech-enabled assessment. So how we approach going out, finding those vulnerabilities, finding those deficiencies in the environment that are causing risk for your teams, and how we can help you address those, starting pretty early in that cycle. And then, we want to talk about, some of the differences between traditional assessments, clipboards and walkdowns and those things, and really how a tech-enabled assessment can, provide a lot more value in those areas. And then as well, once we have that assessment, where do we go from there, right? What does that roadmap or journey look like to go out and not only, find those things in your environment, get you in a good place, but how do we keep you in a good place, with those particular strategies? So over at Verve, when we're doing planning sessions, when we're talking with customers, there's kind of an acronym we came up with, call it Air Raid, that really breaks down how we look at the industry, right? It's how we help make product decisions. It's how we structure some of our go-to-market on things. And just to step through this a little bit, I won't go into too much detail, but really looking at the attackers, right? The attackers have changed over the last few years. We used to talk about nation states and Stuxnet and things. But we're really getting to be a bigger target for some of those commercial hackers. We'll talk a little bit about more about that on some coming slides. The I has actually become very important, right? IT and OT is working on a convergence. I wouldn't certainly say we're there yet. There's still a lot of challenges around whether it's personalities and staffing or technologies that get used on the IT side versus the OT side. So we're going to dive into that a bit in this presentation as well, and kind of talk about some of those challenges and how we can help get around those things. Of course, regulations to drive a fair amount of what we do. Certainly, we all have a desire to reduce risk in our environments and make sure things are up and operational and working as they should. But those regulations are something that we just have to do. There's certainly a lot of regulations that we have in the States around things like the pipeline requirements around electricity and all that. But we're starting to see a lot more regulations being adopted even overseas for some of those environments where they might just be grabbing a NERC SIP or something and adopting those guidelines as they see them to help get a jump start on some of those things. Of course, resource constraints, right? This is always a top of mind for a lot of folks, and that's one of the things that that also drives that IT/OT convergence. There's never enough staff, there's never enough people, but there's always more and more work to do. So we'll talk about that a little bit here as we go along as well. Traditionally in these environments, they've been fairly segregated. They've been kept off network. They've it's a lot easier to protect them when you can't get to them, right? But those days are changing pretty quickly, either through regulatory requirements, desire to have people logging in remotely, vendor access into these environments. It's kind of changing the threat landscape around how you can get into these networks, and that's presented some new challenges that we want to address as well. As part of that risk program, one of the things that companies are always looking to do is to move risk, right? And one of the ways that you do that is through insurance. That it was a pretty hot topic a few years ago. As we've gotten a little more mature in the industry, the insurers are demanding more things from businesses to say, we'll insure you, but you have to have these things in place. You have to be getting better over time. You've got to be able to show your compliance and be able to prove and back that up. And and those premiums are going up as well, right? The cost of insurance is getting more expensive. And we want to be able to help in that arena as well, right? And then lastly in here, there's got to be a lot more visibility in these environments from the top, right? Way back in the day, there was kind of an understanding that that the people at the plants were taking care of their security, or people at a regional level were taking care of the security, and it wasn't necessarily always happening, right? So the boards of these companies have gotten a lot more involved. They want to see measurable improvement. They want to know where things are at, and certainly that's not something that's going to go away over time. That's really just going to get more and more as time goes on, and we need to find some ways to address that. We've also changed a bit about, across industries, where are we really seeing the threats, right? And, the last couple of years have been a big one for manufacturing and energy. We've gone from, being, pretty distant on that chart to now being top of mind for a lot of attackers. There's a lot of soft targets out there that they can get into. The impact they have in the environments is very great, so the payoff is hopefully very great for them as well. And we're really looking for ways to improve the attack surfaces and reduce the risk in these environments because they are so targeted. And I don't see well, we did have a little fall off on energy there from 2020 to 21. I wouldn't see that trend continuing. I think these areas will continue to be pretty top of mind for some of these attacks. The SANS, every couple of years, they take surveys around not necessarily what they're seeing out in the environment, but what are customers saying, right? So what over the years have customers in these sectors said that that their greatest risks are? And as you can see from this, one of the biggest ones is ransomware, right? We went from being maybe fourth or fifth on the list to now being a clear number one, with over 50% of the people very concerned about what we're seeing with with ransomware in those environments. It's tends to be an easy attack avenue for some of the attackers. If I can get in there and I can drop that ransomware on the systems, it's a bit hard to defend from for unprotected systems. And once I have that in there, it's quite a challenge for that company to go in, remediate, do the cleanup, and be able to get those systems back online. So they're a pretty attractive target for those, and pose a big challenge for us. So why is this so hard, right? When we talk about the different challenges that organizations have, staffing tends to be top of mind, right? It's one of the reasons we started a managed services group here at Verve Industrial to help our customers fill in some of those gaps. But one of the things that's led to as well is that IT/OT convergence. Typically in these environments, we have a lot of very good control systems engineers that have done it for a long time. They have those backgrounds, but maybe they don't necessarily have, deep cyber backgrounds, right? On the other hand, we've hired, cyber people into our IT teams. We've come back and asked them to help address some of the challenges that we have in the OT space, but they don't have a lot of OT background or knowledge. They tend to want to come in with maybe some heavy-handed IT tools that don't really fit the risk posture, of those environments, right? It's kind of putting on the big boots and stomping around a little bit, and we want to make sure that we're avoiding that. So we want to help, bring those two groups together. Use the best practices that we've learned in IT over the years, but do it in a very safe and constructive manner, because the last thing we want to do is really go out and interrupt these systems, right? Build that out there. So, where does that take us then, right? One of the big things is we need more efficiency. We need more response plans in place. We need a lot more documentation. We need to figure out when these threats come up. One, how can we mitigate them? How can we reduce the amount of risk that those threats present? But then also, how do we move to a more targeted response in those environments? Of course, we have a lot of varying levels of maturity across the industries. We have folks that are, been doing this for a while. They've got a good handle on things. We also have others that, couldn't tell you what half the devices in their environments are. And how do we put in a structure that helps, both of those teams, right? And how do we move from an environment and noise, right? If there's one thing IT tools and security tools are good at, it's giving you a lot of work to do, right? There's an old adage that says, if I had a 1-by-1 map of the world, what good would it do me? Right? Too much information is as bad as not enough information. If I start, throwing things at people, I give them 10,000 vulnerabilities to go fix, they're probably going to fix none of them because it's an overwhelming task. So we need to be able to provide systems that turn those alerts into actionable work that those folks can go out and address. Jump ahead here. So let's talk a little bit about how we've done things in the past, those traditional assessment methodologies, and whether it's specifically addressing assessments around vulnerabilities or even just assessments around asset discovery and building an inventory, or hardening systems and things. There's a lot of different assessments that you can do out there, and talk a little bit about where we want to go with that, right? So at Verve, when we look at doing assessments, we're very focused on a technology-enabled assessment. This example here happens to come out of NIST, but you can apply this to many other different frameworks. Where first we need to go and assess that environment, right? We need to figure out what's there. We need to figure out, what assets do we have on the network? What procedures do we have in place? What procedures do we want to have in place, right? Figure out, more training. What do we want our program to look like, right? And that's really where Verve steps in, is to help companies figure out, where do I want to be? What does good look like in my environment? And, what tools do I need to put in? All those types of things. And once we've gone down the road of doing that assessment, then the next thing we need to do is remediate. So now I have this information, it's starting to come in, I'm fitting it into my program and the different things that I want to accomplish. One of the things you can do with the Verve platform then is use that same platform that you're using to do the assessment to start that remediation process, right? Go out and start applying those patches. Let's start hardening systems. Let's start cleaning up things that shouldn't be in the system, figuring out our user accounts and what we have out there that maybe is providing more risk in the environment than we really have a tolerance for, right? This is something that, again, where our team, we've got a lot of years of history in the OT environment. We've done countless engagements with customers to help them, walk through that process. And the more we can apply our technology to that, certainly it reduces that time to delivery that we have there. Jump ahead here. So, the way that these things have typically happened in the past, or the way that we've in the past gone about addressing these security assessments, is one is the resource constraints, right? We hear from customers a lot that we're just going to have our in-house folks go and start walking the floor with clipboards and making inventories and trying to figure out what things are. And I've almost never seen that be effective, right? These people are busy, they have day jobs, it's not a high priority for them. And if it takes away from operational issues and things, and it rarely gets done, right? We also have a lot of these environments where some of us might have one plant or one factory. But in most of these customers, we're talking about dozens of plants or hundreds of plants, or in some cases even thousands of plants, and doing those physical visits and walkdowns and things is an extremely long task, right? And how can I speed that time, right? And I'm going to have to do that using technology. Certainly survey-based approaches. There's a lot of consulting firms that'll come in and say, well, we're going to survey all of your people. We're going to ask them a whole bunch of questions. And then we're going to try to come up with a plan out of that. And unfortunately, a lot of times you're asking folks for things they don't know, whether it's asset inventory or procedures or policies. And frankly, the data that you get back from those is not a good input to developing a solid plan for how you want to address, your cyber. Certainly, when we come in, we ask a lot of questions. We collect a lot of data from people as well as from the systems. But strictly a survey-based approach is generally ineffective, right? And then, one of the other challenges with that is, these programs aren't static, right? We're not necessarily going to day one come up with this list of policies and procedures and controls that we want to have in place, go out, start collecting the data, and then be done, right? These things are going to evolve. We're going to decide we need more controls in place. We're going to change the controls we have in place for certain parts of our environments. And I can't go back out to those plants over and over again, collecting data or sending new surveys and applying all of that data back into that program, right? I need something that's automatically collecting that data so that as we're rolling that up, into that one common system, all of the data collection's already done, and I could just evaluate that data against the controls that I put in place to help manage those things, right? So the way that that we go about that then is with our tech-enabled assessment, and this is where we'll really get into the meat of things. Certainly, we'll address vulnerabilities as part of this, but the whole risk discussion is a little bit larger than just vulnerabilities themselves. So our strategy is to use those OT safe methods for collecting data from networks and assets, and get all of that information into a centralized view that we can then use to measure our risks. Right? We at that top layer, can centralize all that data. We can centralize those controls and the evaluation of all of that data to make sure we have a consistent program across the environment. Now, that's not to say you might not apply a different set of risk criteria from one site to another, but certainly, you can do that all from that central point, right, and from a central group. And that's where you can also start planning your remediation, right? As soon as I start bringing data into the platform, I start seeing those risks. I start seeing opportunities for where we can make improvements on things. And I don't have to wait until the end of that assessment phase to go out and start doing remediation on those things. I can use the Verve platform itself to go out and start patching systems. I can use it to start removing software and hardening systems and making sure we're bringing those assets into compliance to really help with that risk program. So the way that we do that then, and we'll kind of come back to this a couple of times as we go through this, is why do we want to do this in a technology-based way, right? So one, we need to use a system that's operationally safe for OT, and that's where Verve comes in. Again, we're a 30-year-old control systems company. We've built this from our extensive work with control systems. We know how to talk to assets. We know how to go out and gather data in a very safe way. But then because I'm bringing all of this data into the platform, right? Not just the data that I'm getting off the assets, the Windows servers, the dump hosts, all these things. But I'm also getting data from all of your network gear. I'm getting data from all of your PLCs, your cards. I'm doing SIP pathing through systems to figure out what's behind them and pull in additional information there. And we'll talk a little bit about the depth of data that we pull in there here in a few slides. And because we're pulling all this into a single system, we can do a much better job of risk assessment, right? Because that's really what vulnerabilities are, is a risk that we need to apply in our environments. And I can start applying all of those controls, to that data. What we also want to avoid is that kind of roller coaster of compliance, right? I have somebody come in, we do an assessment, we make a bunch of changes, and then we do it again in 2 years. And during that 2 years, rot is kind of set into our systems. We're veering off of where we were at, with that, because we don't have an ongoing system of engagement and management to keep these systems up to date. So enterprise visibility is a big one for us too, right? Because we work with so many different control systems, a lot of them have their own tools for gathering data off of those assets. I don't know a lot of companies that only have one control systems vendor. Typically they have many, and getting away from these siloed tools to where we're just talking to that system, we really want to bring that into where we're we have that one unified view across our enterprise, regardless of what systems are in there, what devices are in there, and bring that all into that single pane of glass. So while we might be monitoring one plant or 100 plants or 1,000 plants, we have a single enterprise reporting that all of that information gets rolled up into, right? And that's where we're doing our work. That's where we're making decisions about how we want to apply change to the environment. And that also then helps us accelerate time to security maturity, right? When we're starting to go out and look at these systems, we're bringing in all this data, we're identifying those deficiencies, and again, immediately be able to go out and start remediating things. Oftentimes we have customers that say, well, we're just going to assess for now, and then we'll come up with a plan. But once they start seeing some of the things that's out in their environment, they get pretty concerned and want to start fixing those things pretty immediately. Um, and again, that real-time updating, right? This isn't something we're going to do every 6 months or 3 months or a year or two. This is a real-time view as things are changing in the environment. We're taking all of that data either in a real-time fashion or I think at most maybe every 15 minutes, and we're bringing that into the enterprise console in a safe, OT manner. So making sure that we're not causing, undue CPU time or network stress on those environments. We don't mind operating a little slow with our data collection, just because we want to make sure that we're really reducing the chance of any impact that we could have on those systems. And again, we'll come back to that one a little bit, as we talk here. So the tech-enabled assessment really starts with our platform, right? It's a technology platform, and really at its core, where we need to start is with that asset inventory, right? And everything hinges off of that inventory. And when I say inventory, I want to be very clear. I don't just mean, I have a server name and an IP and a MAC address and maybe an OS type. For most of these systems, we'll gather, more than 100 or hundreds of different characteristics off of those assets that we can bring back into that central reporting. Things like patch status, what software load is on the device, user accounts, what network ports is it listening on, all the interfaces, all of the log data that we collect off of all of these assets. And we do that all in an OT safe manner, and again, roll that up into one central location where we can evaluate that against your risk and compliance controls that you have. And then we could take that data, once we have that robust asset inventory, and we can just start applying other things to it, like vulnerability management. So when we bring in new vulnerabilities, we want to go look for something. We're not out scanning your devices, right? We know the state of your devices. We're not going to have to go out and hit everything again to see if now we're vulnerable to something else. We have that inventory. We'll apply that vulnerability logic to the inventory and bring back those vulnerabilities for you. And again, the last thing we want to do is scan a network. The methods we use for data collection and for asset discovery are very passive. Now we do get asked a lot, well, can't you just listen for packets on the network? And unfortunately, that's not terribly effective. And we'll get in here on the next slide and kind of talk about why that is. So, all of these too, there's a number of things, they're not all on this particular slide, but, things like doing the configuration management, how are these systems configured? What do we have out there that, even though we're showing no vulnerabilities, we're kind of wide open in some other areas. So addressing not just the CVEs, but some of those CWEs that are out there. And again, just to reiterate, doing that all in a safe manner. Now, we also, integrate with some of the other tools that you have in your environment. As we're taking all this data and we're putting this into our centralized console and talking about enterprise risk, there may be other factors that come into play than just what we got off of the asset, right? If I have an asset, that has a particular vulnerability on it, there might be some other things I want to know, like what's the backup status of that asset, right? Because if I don't have any backups for it or they're very stale, I may want to handle that vulnerability or express that risk in a different fashion than I would if it were up to date and patched and had a whitelisting software running on it in lockdown mode. So we need to take all of those factors and be able to use those in our risk calculations to understand what the real risk of these assets is. So let's talk about that visibility a little bit, right? When we talk about asset inventory, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. We pride ourselves very much on providing a very deep asset inventory, right? You can't just sniff some of these things off the wire. A passive discovery is going to get you some very high level data, MAC, IP, whether it's Windows or Linux. Maybe I can guess a version based on a few factors that are out there. I might be able to look at some inbound and outbound traffic that's hopefully not encrypted, and try to derive some things from that. but there's a lot that I'm going to miss, right? And especially when it comes to compliance, there's things I need to know that you're just not going to be able to get off of the wire, right? What users are on the system, right? That's a huge factor. How are those users being managed? Are passwords being maintained? What's my software load on these assets? Not just what talks on the network, but really all of it, right? And then, of course, what vulnerabilities exist. Now, I can guess a few of those vulnerabilities from watching a few packets, but I really need to see what's on the asset. And of course, there's a lot of IT tools that that can go out and look at a Windows host or a Linux host and do some of those things, but typically they don't operate in that risk profile that we're most concerned about. With regard to our OT networks, right? We don't want to go banging around on things. The last thing we want to do is trip a plant or something, or even cause a safety issue, in those plants. So typically those, also have very little visibility into your actual OT gear, right? What PLCs do I have? What kind are they? What's the make, model, firmware, or even serial number on those assets? What relays do I have out there? What cards are out there? Can I discover, SIP paths through the devices to gather more data? Those are things that IT tools are not familiar with and not really focused on. But that's really what we've designed our platform to do. The easier we can make it to go out and safely and gather that information and do that discovery, the better. So, bringing all that data up to the surface, because if you're missing data in your risk program, you're really missing your risks at that point, right? So because of that, then we've always said that I've worked in the security space for a long time, and what I've always found is if you bring in any product into your environment, regardless of what it is, security or otherwise, if you don't have a good process around how you're going to use that product, you probably have some shelfware, right? So that's where we focus a lot. Certainly, we pride ourselves on our technology, but we're also very focused on the processes that we put in place around, how we're using this data, right? We want to make sure that the data is being used, that it's being seen by people, and we're able to illustrate that we're providing risk reduction in your environment. Right. This is not something I look at during audit time. This is something that gets used on a day-to-day basis to help manage my system, patch systems, harden systems, add software, remove software, all of these kinds of things. So we want to make sure that that we have a good experience for those analysts, whether it's somebody from IT that's coming over to do some things on the OT side, or for our OT engineers who aren't, maybe security engineers, but we want to make things pretty easy for them to go out and understand what's happening in the network and be able to address some of the things that are going on there. So prioritization is also very big for us, right? There's too much work to do. We're never going to get everything done, so we need to be smart about how we're addressing some of the challenges that are going on in the environment out there. And we do that by doing calculations on the data that we get. So certainly we get a lot of the data automatically, but there's also some expert data that's coming from your staff that we can incorporate in here as well. So a lot of data points that can either be manually imported, could be just added through the system to make sure that we have all of the context we need to to get these things done. Looks like I need to speed up a little bit here. I'm going to come up on time. There's a lot to go through. So, talking about vulnerabilities a bit, because I know that's one of the big topics of the conversation here. Having worked in vulnerability management for, more than a decade, one of the things I'm certain of is that there's too many vulnerabilities. And again, we need to be smart about how we're addressing those. You're never going to fix all of your vulnerabilities. In fact, I used to work with a company who used to tie their IT bonuses to their vulnerability scores, and they couldn't fix everything. So we need to be able to take all of those factors that we've talked about so far, and be able to use that in our program to get through those vulnerabilities. And apologize, I'm going to go through this a little quick. We're going to come up on time, and I may have got a little long-winded. But prioritization is a big thing, and whether that's prioritizing a vulnerability down or prioritizing it up. Maybe I want to hit those assets where I don't have good mitigating controls and things. And like I say, I'm going to get through this here pretty quick, just because I know we want to get to the Q&A, and I see some questions piling up here. User accounts are, when we go into environments, I mean, everybody's pretty focused on vulnerabilities. What we find is usually user accounts are a mess, and they're creating a lot of risk in those environments. And certainly we could deep dive into that a little bit. I'll have to skip over it here, but something to think about is those are very often low-hanging fruit. A great risk reduction in your environment is user accounts, and we can gather and manage that all for you as well as your network risks. Things like, where do I have a dual home system that's circumventing the controls we put together in a firewall? Where do I have data flowing from one zone to another that shouldn't be? These are all things that we're pulling into the Verve platform. Those are things you can wrap your risk controls around, to make sure that we understand that what's really happening in the environment may differ from the from the Visio that we put together 3 years ago in this environment. And then, I also just want to illustrate, we're not a black box. All of the data that we have is there and available for you to see if you want to see what's going into the risk calculations and what the raw data looks like, what the calculations look like. Not to imply that we're a difficult system to use or complicated. A lot of your folks will enjoy a red and a green pie chart. But when it comes to audit time, typically there's a lot of evidence you need to provide, and we make sure we do a very good job of that. Just for the sake of time here, I'm going to jump ahead through a couple of these. This is something certainly we'd have long discussions with you about roadmaps. How do we start with your current objectives and then turn that into a long-term plan around that maturity level, right? We want to make sure that we're thinking about that end goal in mind, right? And of course, there are more things on vulnerabilities. The big thing for us too is where that level of control comes in, right? We have things that are decisions that might be getting made up at that corporate level, or maybe at a regional level where we have subject matter experts. But then those things have to go down to the plant, right? And how do we involve the people at those plants in those decisions, make sure things aren't happening in the plants automatically that they haven't pushed the button and said okay to. So that's definitely another big area of discussion. Cost savings, of course, anything you can do technology enabled is good for you. But I think I'll leave it there. Like I say, I ran a little short on time. But why don't we take a look at some of the questions that have come into the queue here. Let's see. Yeah, so our as far as our coverage is for control systems, there was a question about Emerson. Certainly, we operate on just about every major control system that's out there. In fact, some of the biggest implementations of those control systems are running the Verve software platform. Typically, when you talk to those vendors, they either have a competing product to Verve that just does their control system and does very basic rudimentary things on it. They're not typically certification programs to run on those control systems. But we've operated safely on all of them that I can think of. We're always adding new systems, new PLCs, new devices. But yes, Emerson is definitely one that we have there. Let's see. Not ready to upgrade the actuator, sensors, and OT. So part of that assessment that we do, we're always going to have things that we can't update, right? Maybe it's an old system, there's no updates to it. Maybe the vendor's not even in business anymore, but it's critical to our operations. And in those cases, we want to be able to, suggest mitigating controls to see if there are ways of reducing the risk we have in there, right? It might be network segmentation. It might be, putting things behind diodes. It might be some application level firewalls and things. There's a lot of other things that we can do to help mitigate those risks. And then in your risk program, you'll be able to illustrate that, well, yes, I know I have this vulnerability here, I have this deficiency here, I have this end-of-life system, but these are the controls that I have in place that are mitigating that risk in my environment to help offset the risk there. Let's see. So there was a question there about frameworks, right? We have a lot of different frameworks that just kind of come with Verve out of the box. Certainly, all of those are meant to be tuned to your environment. There's a lot of interpretation in some of those frameworks. We want to make sure that that it's being interpreted best for your for your objectives of your risk program. We can take those from industry frameworks, whether something like NIST or DISA-STIGs or what have you. But even if you have something at a corporate level that you want to take and apply down into those OT systems with some obvious changes because it's OT, we can help you put those frameworks out there as well. Some of those things will be technical controls, some will be procedural, and what have you. And then there was a question about, how long does an assessment take, right? And, the short answer to that is of course, it depends, how complicated the networks are, how many networks we're talking about. Usually when we go in, we'll sample some networks. We might do a few walkdowns, and, to where we can get started. But again, remember that you don't have to wait until you're, completely done with the assessment before you start making those improvements into those systems, right? As soon as we start collecting data, we apply that to those policies and controls that we have in place, and you can start making those changes on the network. If I had a short answer, I'd probably say it's weeks, not months, to get started and really start making measurable improvements to your environments, whether it's through reduction of vulnerability risk, whether it's through system hardening or what have you. But yeah, it's a pretty quick process to get started with that. Of course, if you have 1,000 plants, it's going to take us a while to deploy across those and things, especially where they might be located on the globe. But yeah, certainly the time to return on it's very quick. Let's see. Okay. I think that's all the questions we had in the chat there. But I really, did want to say that, if there's one takeaway that I hope you have from this, it's, the foundation you build up off of the beginning is really what's going to save you down the road. We get asked a lot, like, hey, I just need an asset inventory. Can you help me with that? And well, while we can, let's really talk about what you want to use that asset inventory for. You want to use it for vulnerabilities. You want to use it for, and just about all of that rolls into that risk reduction. And that's where we really want to be focused is how can I take technology in the OT space to reduce risk. So I think we're coming up on time here, but please, you have my contact information. Reach out if there's questions you had or things we didn't get to. I know I skipped over some slides at the end there. But I appreciate everybody's time today and hopefully talk with many of you in the future.
Thank you, Robert, for your very informative webinar. I'd also like to thank everyone watching wherever you are and for taking the time to listen in. If you want to listen to this webinar again, the session will be available on demand shortly. Remember to check out more of our upcoming events and on-demand webinars at oilandgasiq.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.